In an age of valiant warriors and fearless seafarers lived a man named Rollo. His formidable stature and eyes, reflecting the vastness of the northern seas, marked him not just as a warrior, but as a loyal housecarl, sworn to a respected and revered jarl. From a young age, he wielded an axe with masterful skill, as if born for battle. When the jarl declared an expedition to the western lands, Rollo stood by him without hesitation, ready to defend his leader, whom he considered almost a father. Driven by the harsh northern winds, they set sail towards their destiny, unaware of the storms that might lie hidden beneath the calm waters. In a forest clearing, where trees stood like a dense wall, as if guarding human secrets, an ambush awaited them, 15 wild Vikings bearing no distinguishing marks. Steel cut through the air, the deafening echo of metal resounded through the area, and soon the ground was stained with blood. Rollo fought with the fury of ancient gods, but ultimately witnessed the fall of his jarl, whose last breaths dissolved into the cold mist. With a heavy heart, but untainted honor, Rollo returned to his kingdom, expecting to be met with sympathy and respect. However, fate can sometimes be merciless, like a blade steeped in poison. The moment he entered the village where he had once been celebrated as a hero, he was met with cold stares and venomous whispers. Whispered accusations quickly escalated into furious shouts, branding him a murderer and a traitor. The chains that bound his wrists weighed more than steel, for they carried the burden of injustice. Imprisoned in the heart of the city, surrounded by cold stone and scornful gazes, Rollo found himself encompassed by invisible enemies. Now, his battle was not against swords and axes, but against the sharp tongues and hasty judgments of his own people. Proving his innocence became a matter of life and death for him, akin to wielding a blade in the very thick of battle. Rollo was not born into a noble family, but his strength and resolve were forged by the harsh trials of life. From an early age, he learned that the world was not kind to the weak. He grew up among warriors and learned to wield a blade before he knew the path of honor. In his youth, he joined the ranks of Jarl Sigurd's warriors, a leader whose fame resounded across the coast. Through fierce battles, Rollo proved his worth, fighting shoulder to shoulder with the bravest. When he was granted the title of housecarl, the Jarl's elite bodyguard, he understood that his life no longer belonged to himself. It belonged to duty, blood, and loyalty. Sigurd, in turn, was a jarl respected not only for his strength, but also for the wisdom that guided his people. His kingdom, Skagenjord, was a thriving port, surrounded by mountains and harsh waters, a sanctuary for both merchants and warriors. Sigurd ruled with a firm hand, yet with a generous heart. Rollo and Sigurd were not merely lord and vassal, but brothers in arms, united by victories in battle and cups raised in triumph. In expeditions to the east, they had clashed with Saxons and Franks, conquering lands and bringing wealth back to Skagenjord. It was an alliance built on war and strengthened by unwavering trust. Now they were heading west, seeking alliances and new opportunities for their kingdom. The day of departure began with the roar of the sea, the wind blowing like an unread omen. Rollo fastened his chainmail, sharp as ever, and cast a final glance at the city he called home. Sigurd, standing beside him, smiled, confident in their victorious return. The crew was ready, shields gleaming in the pale morning light, but no amount of forged steel could prepare them for what was to come. The journey began beneath a gray sky, where clouds moved like silent omens. The sea was rough, but the ships sailed steadily, cutting through the waves. The crew continued in silence, each lost in their thoughts, as if sensing that this voyage would be more than just another crossing. Rollo, sitting at the ship's bow, sharpened his axe, feeling the weight of the blade in his hands. Sigurd stood, observing the horizon with his keen gaze. He was not a man of idle words, but when he spoke, every syllable carried the gravity of an experienced commander. After several days, the group disembarked on an unfamiliar shore where vast green fields stretched out. They set up camp to rest before heading inland. The mission was simple: establish contact with a distant settlement, forge alliances, and open new trade routes. The warriors moved through dense forests and treacherous hills, maintaining vigilance. It seemed as if nature itself watched them, the wind whispering through the branches as if trying to reveal a secret. Rollo felt a strange heaviness in his chest, an inexplicable unease. On the morning of the 5th day, the party was smaller. Only Rollo and Sigurd rode ahead, leaving the other warriors behind. The silence between them was not awkward, but rather an exchange of mutual trust. The Jarl smiled slightly, as if he wanted to say something, but saved his words for a more opportune moment. The sound of hooves echoed on the desolate path as they delved deeper and deeper into uncharted territory. The sun began to set, painting the sky in crimson hues, when Rollo finally broke the silence. But before he could utter a word, a strange rustling in the trees sharpened his senses. Something was lurking in ambush. What awaited them? What danger lay in wait for the loyal Housecarl and his Jarl in these wild lands? The answers to these questions lay around the bend of the trail, in the shadows of the approaching night. The ambush unfolded with lightning speed, leaving no time for comprehension. As if from nowhere, 12 ominous figures emerged from the dense foliage, while 3 more cut off their retreat, appearing like phantoms from behind. Rollo, obeying instinct, drew his trusty sword, while Sigurd gripped his battle axe, ready for the fight. A furious battle cry ripped through the forest's silence, and a bloody frenzy began. Blades flashed in the last rays of the setting sun. The clang of steel echoed through the surroundings, and horses' hooves struck sparks from the ground. Rollo, like a panther, leaped from his horse, evading a fatal blow that could have cost him his head. Sigurd, despite his venerable age, fought with the courage of a cornered wolf. His axe sliced through the air with deadly precision, delivering crushing blows to his merciless foes. But the odds were uneven. This was no ordinary bandit raid, but a well-planned assassination. Rollo realized too late that the attacker's goal was not mere plunder or horse theft. An enemy grabbed his arm, but he instantly threw him off. Rollo's gaze fell upon Sigurd, and he witnessed the inevitable. An enemy spear pierced the Jarl's body, as if in slow motion. Rollo's roar of fury echoed across the battlefield as his lord's body collapsed to the ground. Sigurd's blood, like a bitter offering to the gods, stained the earth. Blinded by rage, Rollo continued to fight, but the assassins, having achieved their goal, retreated. He fell to his knees beside his friend's body, and the sound of the wind now seemed like a funeral wail. Looking up, he saw only the receding silhouettes of the assassins, who left behind nothing but dust and a crushing sense of betrayal. His heart pounded wildly in his chest. He knew that no one would believe his words. Returning home promised an even greater storm, and deep down, he felt that this was only the beginning of a sinister game. The smell of death was in the air even before Rollo saw the mutilated bodies. He made his way to the shore, where the warriors who had brought them across the sea were supposed to be waiting. Instead, he discovered a horrifying massacre. Bodies were strewn across the beach, some warriors still clutching their weapons, others lying limply on broken shields. The sea washed over the blood-stained sand, and gulls circled overhead, drawn by the scent of blood and death. The ships were ablaze, reduced to charred wreckage bobbing on the waves. Someone had ensured there would be no witnesses, and now Rollo was alone. He knelt beside the body of a fallen warrior, an old comrade from past battles. Turning the body over, he saw only empty eyes staring into nothingness. Rage clenched his fists, but he knew it was useless to scream into the wind. The attackers, whoever they were, had acted cold-bloodedly and methodically. They had left no traces, no clues pointing to their identity or origin. But one thing was clear: someone desired Sigurd's death, and someone wanted Rollo not to return and tell his side of the story. Given the destroyed ships and lack of survivors, the only option was to head inland. After long hours of wandering, he stumbled upon a small fishing village nestled between cliffs. The locals eyed the blood-stained warrior emerging from the mist with suspicion, but an old man, recognizing Sigurd's crest on his torn tunic, decided to help him. They offered him shelter for one night and promised to take him back to his kingdom on one of their boats the next morning. Rollo silently stared at the horizon with a grim gaze. He knew that upon his return, he would not be met with honors. A sense of dread told him that the true traitors were already waiting, ready to lay the blame for what had happened upon him, and deep down, he understood that his fight was just beginning. The only one who knew the route was Ivar, Jarl Sigurd's brother. Rollo's return to his kingdom was nothing like he had imagined. As he approached the gates, he noticed an unsettling silence in the streets and the intense stares of the residents, indicating that his arrival was expected. The fortress gates were open, but not for a welcome. Before he could utter a word, a group of guards rushed him, dragged him from his horse, and wrestled him to the ground. "Arrest the traitor!" A loud cry rang out. Rollo tried to resist, but the combined strength of the warriors immobilized him. He had no chance to defend himself. The gazes that once held respect were now filled with scorn. Dragged into the great hall, Rollo felt a heaviness in his chest upon seeing who sat on the throne that once belonged to Sigurd. Ivar, the Jarl's brother, presided over the council with a cold smile on his face. "Rollo, you traitorous dog, you have finally returned," he declared, leaning forward and drumming his fingers on the armrest of the throne. "You killed my brother and fled like a cowardly rat. Now you will be judged for your deeds." Accusations rained down like poison, and none of the assembled warriors wished to hear him. Some seemed to hesitate, but no one dared speak in his defense. He was thrown into a cold, dark cell without any explanation. His hands were bound with rough ropes, and the taste of blood in his mouth reminded him of the brutality with which he had been seized. Outside, guards whispered about his sentence. Death. The weight of the treason he was accused of was so immense that no one believed in his innocence. But Rollo knew that if he wanted to survive, he needed to find a way to prove his truth before it was too late. Within the grim walls of the prison, finding allies seemed impossible for Rollo. The stone walls of the cell, permeated with dampness and the scent of sea salt, combined with the foul odor of the narrow corridors, created an oppressive atmosphere. The clanking of chains and the echoing voices of prisoners only intensified the sense of hopelessness. However, contrary to expectations, something unexpected happened. From the neighboring cell, a hoarse, aged voice emanated as if from the depths of an ancient nightmare. "Looks like the dog is in a cage, eh?" It was Eric, a man whose face and body bore the marks of countless battles, but whose mind had been sharpened by years spent in the criminal underworld. He seemed to know everything about Rollo's misfortunes and Sigurd's tragic fate. Eric had spent most of his life in the shadows, but his cunning had not diminished with age. "Listen, friend," he began, a faint smile visible through his thick beard. "I can help you get out of here. I'm not the strong warrior I once was, but I still have connections and a knack for persuasion. And you have what I lack, strength." He paused, as if to ensure Rollo was listening intently. "I can get out of here alone. I need help. But you have everything it takes to break these chains and crush this city as resistance." Rollo looked at him with suspicion, but understood that this offer was his only chance to escape captivity. Then Eric revealed his plan. "I have a crew. Some call me a leader, some a mentor. They are thieves, bounty hunters, masters of getting out of the most difficult situations. If you help me escape, I'll take you to them, and together we can hunt down the true culprits. Ivar is already a dead man, and you have much more reason for vengeance." He smiled, a calculating glint in his eyes. "Besides, who doesn't love a little revenge, eh? I'll show you the way, but you will have to do the dirty work." Rollo hesitated, but realized he didn't have many options for survival. He would have to do whatever was necessary. The plan was made, and if all went well, he would have a chance for revenge. But at the same time, a new burden fell upon his shoulders. This would not just be a fight for survival, but a battle to regain control of his destiny. Seeing no other way out and realizing Eric was his only chance for freedom, Rollo accepted the offer. The plan was devised, and though an instinct of distrust made him waver, he knew this was his sole opportunity. Deep in the night, with darkness as their ally, Eric put his cunning into practice. With nimble movements, he opened Rollo's cell, and together they moved through the shadows, navigating narrow passages known only to an old thief like Eric. The silence was absolute, and as they moved further from the prison, Rollo felt adrenaline surge through his veins. Reaching the city outskirts, Eric led him along little-known paths where the piercing dawn wind made their footsteps echo in anticipation of what was to come. After several hours of travel through dense forests and icy rivers, they arrived at a camp hidden in the mountains. Eric's appearance brought jubilation among his crew. His return was met with joy, and before he was surrounded by his warriors, he gestured for Rollo to come closer. The warriors, seeing their leader, immediately recognized Rollo as an ally. Despite a strange feeling, he couldn't deny a sense of belonging, even if temporary. After the greetings, Eric asked everyone to gather around the campfire. It was time to recount his journey, and more importantly, Rollo's misfortunes. Eric omitted no detail, narrating the betrayal, Sigurd's murder, and the unjust accusation hanging over his new friend. Everyone listened in silence, their faces expressing surprise and indignation. It became clear that the bond Eric had forged with Rollo was now strong. For several days, while feasts and celebrations of their leader's return filled the camp, Rollo observed, trained, and adapted to his new world. He felt in his element once more, but understood that the real struggle lay ahead. This was not just about revenge, but a quest for justice. That path would not be easy. The weeks Rollo spent with Eric's crew were more than just physical training. It was an immersion into a world he had never suspected existed, a reality of disguise, stealth, and the survival strategies Eric's thieves employed. From the moment he arrived at the camp, Rollo was engaged in intense training, far beyond what he was accustomed to as a warrior. Mornings began with rigorous physical drills, but it was the lessons in espionage and cunning that truly altered his worldview. Eric, with his experience and wit, became his mentor. He understood that for survival on the streets and to achieve his goals, Rollo had to learn to hide in plain sight, blend into crowds, and remain unseen even when all eyes were on him. "The best fight is the one no one sees," Eric would say with a mischievous smile. At first, Rollo felt out of his depth. He was used to direct combat, to strength and honor, but now he had to embrace a new approach. He learned to move inconspicuously through crowded markets, to enter taverns bustling with soldiers and merchants without drawing suspicion. Nights were spent discussing and practicing how to identify and gather valuable information, and how to approach targets without attracting notice. The alliance between Rollo and Eric formed in the most unexpected way. Initially, Eric appeared as a seasoned veteran of thievery, and Rollo as a man driven by a desire to restore his tarnished honor. However, over time, their relationship evolved into something more profound, a strong friendship built on mutual respect and shared experiences. Conversations by the campfire were not just for discussing plans for future thefts and raids. Eric shared memories of his youth when he was a knight of a small kingdom that fell victim to another's greed. Rollo, in turn, spoke of his Jarl Sigurd and their battles together. Despite their differing paths in life, they were united by a yearning for justice in a world where it seemed an unattainable dream. The late-night gatherings brought Rollo fleeting comfort in Eric's friendship, something that had seemed impossible in this harsh world. Nevertheless, an atmosphere of tension was constantly felt. Rollo realized that despite his growing friendship with Eric, he could not remain in this camp forever. His mission was to return to his homeland, restore his honor, and prove his innocence. Time relentlessly slipped by, and the burden of destiny grew ever more palpable. No matter how Eric offered him refuge and new horizons, the flame of vengeance and thirst for justice burned with unquenchable power in his soul. Rollo understood that his return to the kingdom would mark the beginning of an even more challenging path, where he would face Sigurd's brother, the treacherous Ivar, and prove his non-involvement in the murder he was accused of. But the weeks spent with Eric's thieves represented his last opportunity to prepare for the coming trials. And at the same time, a question tormented him: could he reclaim all that was lost without losing his soul in the process? For weeks and months, Rollo lived as if in two worlds, one foot on the battlefield, the other on a personal journey. During this time, he and Eric became practically inseparable, not only out of necessity for survival, but also due to a growing sense of camaraderie between them. In the company of Eric's men, Rollo learned to be more than just a warrior. He mastered the art of blending into crowds, reading between the lines, disguising himself, and gathering crucial evidence. In every village they passed through, he caught the secret whispers of merchants and travelers. In every tavern, he absorbed information like a phantom, and gradually, Ivar, Sigurd's brother's insidious plan, began to take shape before him. The evidence Rollo gathered was both obvious and devastating: letters, testimonies, and even Ivar's detailed plan to eliminate Sigurd and seize power in the kingdom. Ivar, blinded by his lust for power, had failed to conceal the traces of his betrayal. Rollo understood that, at the right moment, he would have enough means to prove to his people that Sigurd's death was not an accident, but the result of a conspiracy by a man who should never have been entrusted with power. With a heavy heart, yet filled with determination, he realized it was time to return, to reveal the truth and reclaim his lost honor. Having gathered all the evidence and mentally prepared for the coming confrontation, Rollo and Eric headed north. Rollo mounted his horse with a heavy heart, sensing that returning to his home kingdom would be fraught with immense difficulties. The journey was not easy. The wind bit at his face, but in Rollo's soul, there was no room for doubt, only a firm resolve to reach the kingdom that had once been his home. Familiar landscapes began to appear on the horizon. Hills and fields he remembered well. The scent of his homeland enveloped him like a silent warning of impending events. Sigurd's kingdom lay before him, but something within Rollo told him that the doors that had once been open to him were now closed. He knew that once he crossed the kingdom's threshold, he would no longer be the same. The burden of truth weighed on him, but the fear of how it would all end never left him. As they neared the kingdom's border, where forests and fields gave way to the impregnable wall encircling the city, Eric stopped. He looked at Rollo with the gaze of a man who had seen many perish on their paths, yet also with the look of one who knew when to step back and let another walk their own way. It was a moment of farewell, but not an end. Rollo felt a slight tension in the air, a mix of gratitude and sadness, realizing he had to go on alone. Eric placed a hand on his shoulder, his face conveying seriousness, yet with a hint of a sad smile. "Rollo," he said in a husky, deep voice, "the world is vast and full of possibilities. Whatever happens here, know that the doors of my clan will always be open to you. You have become more than just an ally to us. If one day you feel your fight is over, or if your will demands more of you, you will always find a place among us. But for now, go your way and meet what is destined." Rollo looked into Eric's eyes, feeling the strength and wisdom of a man who, though past his warring days, still knew what was needed for survival. After exchanging a final glance, Rollo mounted his horse, feeling the onset of solitude as Eric remained behind. The weight of the old thief's words echoed in his mind, but there was no more time for reflection. The kingdom's city awaited him, and his honor still needed to be reclaimed. With a final wave of his hand, he moved forward, heading towards the gates that would lead him back to his past. The city lay hushed in an ominous silence, as if anticipating a storm. The wind seemed to pierce the streets with amplified force, as if striving to dispel the approaching gloom. Rollo knew the words he was about to utter would be a turning point in history. As he neared the main gates, he let out a thunderous cry that echoed throughout the city. "Ivar is a traitor. I have proof." "Your brother fell by your hand." Rollo's voice seethed with rage and pain, reflecting all the suffering he had endured during his absence. His words, like arrows, pierced the city walls, reached the guards on duty, and in an instant, a crowd of the curious began to gather around Rollo. In their gazes, he saw disbelief and surprise, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that he was here with irrefutable evidence, ready to reveal the truth everyone needed to hear. Sigurd's blood still haunted his dreams, and he was willing to do anything to clear his former Jarl's name. But deep down, he understood this was only the beginning of a battle far from over. Rollo's cry continued to ring in the ears of the assembled crowd, the accusation echoing in the air. People thronged the streets, driven by curiosity, confusion, and some even by fear of what was to unfold. The tension in the air was so thick it could be felt physically. At the center of this swirling maelstrom stood Rollo, unyielding, his chest heaving with fury, and the truth in his hands. The evidence, there it was, crumpled sheets of paper he carried like a banner. But he knew many more trials lay ahead. Ivar, the architect of all the lies, betrayal, and Sigurd's death, appeared before him. His figure slowly emerged from the crowd, his steps heavy and determined. He was cloaked in a dark mantle, and a fierce expression was etched on his face, as if he was ready to destroy anyone who dared challenge him. Rollo felt the hostility thicken, the air growing heavier with each passing second. Coming close enough, Ivar looked into Rollo's eyes with unbridled fury, clenching his fists until his knuckles turned white. "Do you think you have a chance, Rollo? You don't understand what's happening here," Ivar hissed in a low but rage-filled voice. He reached out and threw the evidence to the ground for all to see. For a moment, silence reigned, broken only by the crowd's whispers, but Rollo's gaze remained fixed on Ivar, catching every word. "I know you lied about Sigurd's death, and I know what you did," Rollo proclaimed, pointing to the evidence. "This is what you did, Ivar. This is what you tried to hide." With a sardonic smirk, Ivar stepped forward and swept his gaze across the crowd. He could no longer contain the rage seething within him. Like a wild beast ready to strike, he spat on the ground, showing his contempt for Rollo's words and the accusation leveled against him. "Do you think I'm the only one with secrets in this kingdom, Rollo? I am the true ruler here." Sigurd was weak. He could never rule with the strength this kingdom needs. Ivar roared, his eyes filled with madness. "You don't know what it takes to rule or what has transpired in the shadows of our clans." The crowd stirred, expressing disapproval and disbelief, but Ivar, instead of retreating or justifying himself, seemed to grow even more enraged. He lunged forward, rage consuming his body, and suddenly, without warning, drew an axe from its sheath. The metallic sound of the drawn blade signaled to all present this was no longer mere verbal sparring. "I will finish you, Rollo," Ivar roared, advancing with astonishing speed, his axe whistling menacingly through the air. Rollo prepared for battle, his heart pounding, but his warrior instincts took over. He would not let this man escape justice, and now, more than ever, his vengeance for Sigurd had to be exacted. He drew his sword with a precise movement, and steel glinted in the sun as he braced for impact. Ivar, with a furious shout, delivered the first blow with brutal force, aiming for Rollo's chest. The axe cleaved the air with terrifying power, but Rollo dodged, stepping aside and avoiding the strike. The axe's impact on the ground made it shudder, and Rollo realized the full extent of Ivar's strength. "You'll pay for this, Ivar," Rollo shouted, advancing with his sword and delivering a swift strike at his opponent's legs. Ivar groaned in pain, but his rage only intensified. He swung his axe again, this time aiming for Rollo's head. The battle between them became a deadly dance of blades, the clang of swords and axes echoing through the air. Rollo, agile and focused, expertly dodged Ivar's wild swings, trying to find an opening to deliver a fatal blow. The surrounding crowd stood frozen in awe, watching this mortal duel. Shouts and exclamations mingled as the two men clashed fiercely in the center of the square. The ground was stained with the blood of both, and the battle seemed endless. Rollo knew he had to defeat Ivar, but every move carried risk. He felt the pressure from those around him, hoping for truth to prevail, but his own fate was inextricably linked to this fight. The tension in the air reached its peak, and it seemed only one of them would emerge alive from this confrontation. The future of the kingdom now rested on Rollo. The fury of the clash between Rollo and Ivar reached its peak, leaving the spectators spellbound. The thunderous impact of axes wildly striking Rollo's steel blades echoed throughout the surroundings, creating an atmosphere of unbearable tension. Ivar, consumed by madness, unleashed a barrage of chaotic blows, but Rollo, tempered by experience and discipline, showed miraculous agility, patiently waiting for the opportune moment. As Ivar's strength waned, his movements lost their former speed and precision. And then, in a moment of ultimate vulnerability, Rollo seized his chance. With a guttural cry, he surged forward and with one precise strike, dislodged Ivar's footing, forcing him to his knees. The axe slipped treacherously from Ivar's weakened fingers, and Rollo, with a lightning-fast swing of his sword, brought the blade down for the decisive blow. A ringing silence descended upon the square. Ivar, his eyes reflecting fury and terror, stared at Rollo, then let out a doomed sigh of defeat. Rollo, without hesitation, plunged his blade into the vanquished enemy's chest. The crowd, which had been watching the duel in fascination, erupted in a triumphant roar. Rollo, breathing heavily and stained with blood, stood over Ivar's body, surveying the faces of the assembled crowd. The battle had ended, and justice, for now, had prevailed. The elders and advisors of the late Jarl Sigurd, who had silently witnessed the confrontation, approached Rollo. Their admiration was not only for his martial prowess, but also for the courage he displayed in confronting the traitor Ivar. The leader of the advisors, a venerable elder with a long white beard, raised his hand, commanding everyone's attention. "Rollo, son of Sigurd, you have restored the honor of your Jarl and his kingdom. Ivar's treachery will not be forgotten, but from this day forth, the truth is known to all. For your bravery, for the deed performed in the name of our land and its people, we forgive you and restore your good name," the elder declared in a firm and solemn voice. The crowd, previously torn by fear and doubt, erupted in applause. Rollo's name echoed through the streets, and he was unanimously recognized as the rightful heir to his Jarl's reclaimed honor. The advisors offered him a place back in the kingdom, bestowing a high title in recognition of his valor. However, Rollo, still breathless from the battle, cast a grateful look at the advisors, a look that conveyed something more, something hard to define. He looked at the cheering crowd and at the kingdom which, despite everything, remained his home. But he knew what his soul yearned for. Titles and glory no longer tempted him. His destiny lay beyond these walls, far from crowns and the burdens of power. He had already made his choice. I am grateful for your forgiveness, but my path lies elsewhere. My honor is restored and my duty is fulfilled, Rollo stated firmly and respectfully. I am returning to my friends who have always understood me. I have found my place. With these words, he bowed to the elders and advisors, and the crowd, filled with surprise, understood his decision. Rollo, the Viking who had reclaimed his honor, was now set on a different future. He left the square and headed towards the coast, where his destiny awaited him. In the distance, Eric's figure was visible, greeting him with an understanding and welcoming smile, as if he had known all along that this was Rollo's fate. The path was clear. No more burdens of the kingdom or thirst for vengeance, only the freedom to choose his own way. Rollo joined Eric's band of thieves and mercenaries with whom he shared the remainder of his days on battlefields and in the shadows of night. He found a new life, free from the shackles of the past. The story of Rollo, the Viking who fought for truth, concluded with freedom, and his name would be remembered not for victories on the battlefield, but for the courage to choose his own destiny. And so, the Viking set forth, not swayed by the promises of kingdoms and thrones, but with a firm belief that true honor lies in living by the dictates of one's own heart.